Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, Israel vaccinates its 5 millionth citizen, with eyes set to finish off the rest of the adult population by the end of next month. Meanwhile, we take a look at Israel's Arab-Knesset parties in the second installment of our Knesset elections breakdown. And finally, history always just under our feet. A young Israeli boy finding a 2,500-year-old figurine while out on a hike with his family. Israeli police arresting 4 Galilee residents this week, suspected of helping 2 other suspects escape custody last week. The 2 main suspects having allegedly attacked an IDF Egoz unit commando and stolen his weapon last Wednesday. But IDF footage of the raid showing a bird's-eye view of the action, police ending a long and complicated investigation with the arrest of all the targeted subjects, and the recovering of both the stolen weapon and its ammunition. Still, as for the soldier who was attacked, while the IDF is praising him for promptly reporting the incident, the commander of the elite Egoz unit is condemning his apparent weakness, telling the rest of the unit that a soldier who doesn't know how to defeat 2 enemies in battle and has his weapon snatched away cannot belong to Egoz, adding that even in combat, I will not accept a POW unless, God forbid, he's a corpse. On a positive note now, Israel on Monday reached 5 million vaccinations, and that means that over half of its population is now vaccinated. Chana Rifkin reporting.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is on a mission to vaccinate Israel's entire adult population by the end of April. And on Monday at a press conference in Tel Aviv, he stood beside Janet Lavi Azuli, a pregnant Israeli woman who was the 5 millionth person to receive the coronavirus vaccine.
אנחנו מציינים 5 מיליון מחוסנים, ואנחנו גם מציינים את פתיחת הכלכלה שלנו כמעט כולה בתו ירוק אתמול. נשאר לנו כמיליון בוגרים מעל גיל 50 לחסן, בכלל מעל גיל 16 לחסן. הערכה שלנו שעד סוף אפריל גמרנו לחסן את כולם, ואין מה לחשוש. אני יודע שז'נט בהיריון כרגע. מאחלים לך חג טוב.
תודה, תודה.
ובאמת לאף אחד, כל הפייק ניוז זה פייק ניוז. לכו להתחסן, נשלים את המלאכה ונעשה את זה יחד. לשמור על הכללים, ועד סוף אפריל כל האוכלוסייה הבוגרת מעל גיל 16 של מדינת ישראל מחוסנת. בעזרת השם, גם בעזרתכם. תודה רבה לכם.
Yet, even though the Israeli economy is practically back to normal, a new report released Monday has cast some doubt on how soon Israel should issue green passes after vaccination, which allow Israelis to enjoy restaurants and attractions unavailable to people who are not vaccinated. Meuchedet Healthcare Services reported a study it conducted on some 100,000 of its members and said that the vaccine effectiveness reaches 96% only 2 weeks after the second dose and is only at 89% effectiveness a week to 14 days from the second dose. It cautioned that issuing green passes a week after vaccination and not 2 weeks after could cause an increase in the spread of the disease. And meanwhile, while Israel continues to see a drop overall in coronavirus cases in the general population, the ultra-Orthodox and Arab sectors have seen an increase in cases, according to the health ministry. Also, while the economy is reopening fast inside the country, Israel is still weary over allowing people to enter and leave the country. So on Monday, El Al launched a new pilot program at Ben Gurion Airport for rapid coronavirus testing for passengers who are not vaccinated, mainly for children. The test provides results within 15 to 20 minutes, and every passenger that is negative is allowed to board the flight.
I'm coming from Miami, Florida. I want to tell you I'm amazed by the efficiency, the order, the speed in which they get you in and out. You do the test, you're out in 2 minutes. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Israel is the place to be.
Now, in related news, Israel is setting a global example for how to vaccinate its population and battle the coronavirus, and world leaders are still paying close attention. The Hungarian and Czech prime ministers, for one, will meet Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu this Thursday to discuss how to effectively fight COVID-19. Europe is currently in the midst of a third wave of the coronavirus, and these 2 countries are especially hard hit. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban's press chief saying that, quote, the main topic of the meeting will be the effort to curb the pandemic. Meanwhile, on Monday, Netanyahu met with Brazilian Minister of Foreign Affairs Ernesto Araújo, as well as with member of the Brazilian Chamber of Deputies Eduardo Bolsonaro. And according to the Prime Minister's office, They discussed the global battle against the coronavirus and opportunities for cooperation between Israel and Brazil in this area, as well as bolstering of capabilities in both countries for research and development of vaccines against future diseases. Then additionally, just last week, Denmark and Austria agreeing to join forces with Israel by investing in research and vaccines against new waves of mutations of the virus. But that's not all. According to a report from Kan Public Broadcaster on Monday, Israel is planning to renew its program to supply surplus coronavirus vaccines to foreign countries. According to the report, Israel is negotiating with 20 different countries, including Cyprus, Hungary, the Maldives, Ethiopia, Uganda, and Guatemala, and with Moderna to send up to 100,000 vaccines abroad. Now, as mentioned earlier, Israel is preparing to renew its vaccine diplomacy program after it was originally shot down by the Attorney General. And joining me to discuss its return, we have former Israeli ambassador to the United States, Dani Ayalon, and Professor Avi Bell from the Faculty of Law at Bar-Ilan University. Thank you both so much for being with us now. Ambassador Ayalon, I'm going to start with you. We had you on a couple weeks ago, actually, to discuss this plan when it was first announced, before it was shot down. Did you expect the Attorney General Mandelblit to kill it and to send it back to the drawing board?
No, not really, because basically I think this is a legitimate political decision by the executive branch, and it goes right down to the core of Israel's interests, and it is the choosing of the leaders, certainly of the foreign affairs, to decide which country can get what, including vaccines. By the way, this is not only for Israel to do. We see it by other countries doing the same, and it's not just is exclusive to vaccines. It goes all the way from petroleum to all kinds of other technologies. So I think this is quite legitimate to do it according to one country's interests.
Professor Bell, what was originally wrong with this plan, legally speaking, and what changed since then?
Frankly, I don't think that anything was wrong with the program. The dispute is about a technical matter, which is whether there's a law that specifically authorizes certain actions. And the only thing that's clear in the law is that the Attorney General has no authority to veto this program. He has no authority to dictate the procedures by which it will take place. There are a number of different provisions by which it's fairly clear that senior ministers, including the Ministry of Treasury, the Finance Minister, that is, and in the Ministry of Health, and probably the Prime Minister as well, have the authority to do this sort of thing. And it's pretty much the same authority that the Prime Minister used to acquire the vaccines in the first place. There's a law that's called the Government Assets Law, and it basically permits creating international agreements to acquire and to dispose of government assets for these kinds of purposes. So I think there's nothing legally wrong with it. I think that the Attorney General's overstepped here.
Interesting. So, Ambassador Ayalon, do you agree? Did Attorney General Mandelblit overstep or exceed the purview of his power, of his role?
Well, possibly. I'm not really in a position to go down into the finessing the laws as Professor Avi Bell does, but I can tell you that in principle there is an ongoing debate here, really dividing the country and most of the parties on the role or lack of the executive branch vis-a-vis the legislative, especially the Supreme Court. There is really I would say a lax, for a long time, attitude by the executive, where they do shy from taking bold, controversial decisions and prefer to just, kicking it up to the court, so they do not take any political flack. So I don't think it's solely let's say the blame is there's a lot of blame to share between all parties, and I do think that we will need, I don't see it coming in the next government elected because we have such slim margins here and we have other issues. But I think it is high time for Israel to re-regulate the relationship between the executive and legislative branches.
Interesting. All right, now, Professor Bell, I want to come back to you for a second, because aside from Attorney General Mandelblit and his objections, Israel's vaccine diplomacy has been criticized for allegedly holding the health of our allies and our neighbors hostage, as well as for ignoring the plight, allegedly, of the Palestinian Authority. How do you respond? Do you agree that this is somehow a bribe or an extortion of some sort?
I think it's quite the opposite. I think that what happened here is that Israel's had the good fortune to find itself where it took steps to acquire vaccines very early and put itself at the head of the line with a number of companies. And the vaccination program has been extremely successful. And thus we find ourselves towards the end of the vaccination program with apparently a surplus. And at this point, the only responsible thing to do, I think, is what the government is going to do, which is to give it out to other citizens of the world to protect their own health. And I think that it's not only legitimate, it's required that Israel do so as part of its international relations with other countries, that it do so in cooperation with its friends and allies, and it do so in order to help those who need the help and who have ongoing relations with us.
All right. Well, you've certainly left us a lot to think about. Professor Avi Bell, Ambassador Dani Ayalon, thank you both so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Now, with 14 days left ahead of Israel's 2021 Knesset elections, we continue with the second installment of our Knesset Party's breakdown. And today, we'll be looking to the Arab-Israeli factions vying for your vote, the Joint Arab List and the United Arab List, or RAM. Activist, communist, feminist, pragmatist, extremist? Arab-Israeli Knesset members have been given a lot of titles, some earned, some self-proclaimed, and some completely false or misleading. But the sheer array of differing opinions present in the current Arab parties is part of what makes categorizing their ideology so complex. But currently there are 4 Arab-Israeli parties: Balad, Hadash, Tal, and the United Arab List, or RAM. And until recently, they were all unified under the title of the Joint Arab List, with Hadash chairman Ayman Odeh at the helm, a decision first made in 2015 that earned them 15 seats in Knesset and made them the 3rd largest party behind Yesh Atid and the Likud. Platform, meanwhile, supported by many Israeli Arabs and Bedouin citizens, largely focusing on 2 main topics. First being Israeli Arab life in Israel, with policies including separation of religion and state, exempting Arabs from IDF service, which they already are, and increasing budget for Arab-Israeli community issues like lack of housing, combating violence, and subsidizing Muslim, Christian, and Druze holy places. Then the second topic, Palestinian affairs, including Israeli withdrawal to the pre-1967 borders, the creation of a Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital, and the dismantlement of Israeli settlements, in addition to the extending of the right of return to Israel for Palestinian refugees and their descendants, which most Israelis consider to be an attack on the very fabric of Israeli society. In fact, the party has often been embroiled in controversy, with most other parties refusing to even consider including the Arab List in a coalition. And this, as list members are accused of anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism, and supporting terrorism. Most notably, when former member Hanin Zoabi attempted to break Israel's maritime blockade around Gaza in 2014, or when former member Jamal Zahalka was accused of supplying intelligence to the Hezbollah terror group, or when former member Basil Ghatas was arrested for supplying contraband cell phones to convicted Palestinian terrorists in prison. And the Central Elections Committee has multiple times disqualified members or whole factions from the Joint List from elections, only to be typically overturned by the High Court. So now fast forward to today, and the political climate has shifted dramatically. Many of the supposedly more problematic members are gone, and the fairly consistent focus on Palestinian rights at the apparent expense of the local Arabs is starting to turn around. But Arab voter turnout already expected to be at an all-time low. And to make matters worse, due to both ideological differences and party term limits, the disillusioned Arab vote is now splitting further. This as the RAM party has split off for a solo run. RAM chairman Mansour Abbas, seen as a religious pragmatist, explaining that his faction will be better off untethered. And already he's been hard at work trying to separate his party as being more moderate by meeting with the Likud, hosting committee meetings on local issues, and breaking with the majority of the rest of the Joint List by voting against them in the Knesset on issues like banning sexual orientation conversion therapy for LGBT individuals. Still, RAM is now expected to fail to even get into the Knesset, polling with just 2.6% of the vote, while the remaining joint list parties are expected to drop from 11 seats to 8. Moving on, massive news in Israeli pharmaceutical R&D. Researchers at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem discovering a way to potentially eliminate animal testing when developing new drugs. And here with the details is Professor Yaakov Kobi Nachmias, founding director of the Alexander Grass Center for Bioengineering at the Hebrew University, and a faculty member at the Center for Engineering in Medicine at Harvard Medical School. Thank you so much for being with us, Professor. What is this discovery? Can you break it down for us, and how does it work?
Thank you. So this has been a long time coming. Over 30 years ago, we realized that we can do experiments without the use of animals, essentially taking human cells with human genetics and human metabolism and put them on these microfluidic chips that mimic normal human physiology. The problem is that, there is a big difference between, trying to do these experiments and getting the elements of the systems to work. What we did is find a way to integrate sensors into those systems. Essentially the same way you have a computer in your car talking to all the different sensors and elements in the car. And then talking with these sensors to understand how do drugs work, and when something doesn't work, for example, in a disease like cancer, how to fix it in a fast way that would enable us to find a drug for the disease that is needed.
So, and you just alluded to this, and I understand that this was basically developed in the framework of testing cancer treatments. How do you know now, because you said that this was the challenge, to get all the little details right, how do you know that you got all the details right?
So what we did is essentially develop a model for the human kidney. It's one of the organs that is always damaged when cancer patients get chemotherapeutics. This is one of the major reasons we limit those chemotherapeutics. People undergo treatment for only a few days, and then we let the body recover, and then we go with another treatment. What we found is that our sensors started tingling and telling us that there was a massive buildup of fat because of glucose that was gathering in the kidney every time those kidney cells received cisplatin, which is a very commonly used chemotherapeutic agent. And once we figured that out, we could block it with a drug that blocks glucose reabsorption. Originally, it was developed for diabetes. And we could rapidly go to the clinic and ask, are the patients that are diabetic the ones getting this drug? Maybe their kidney isn't damaged during cancer treatments. And it turns out that was the case. Over 200 patients in Hadassah that received a diabetic drug were protected from the chemotherapeutic agent damage.
Wow, so it sounds like, I mean, really you almost stumbled upon it, but I mean, it's just such an incredible discovery, and I'm really excited, obviously, for all of the news about eliminating the need for animal testing. I think most people can get behind that. Professor Nachmias, thank you so much for sharing this with us.
Thank you.
In other news, imagine taking a family hike and stumbling across an ancient artifact. Well, that's exactly what happened a few weeks ago to none other than a young Israeli boy. A rare female figurine dating back 2,500 years ago was discovered by an 11-year-old boy while out on a family trip. Tzvi Ben David from Beersheva was on a hike to Nachal HaBesor when he caught sight of the unusual object. And well, this ancient artifact turned out to be from the end of the Iron Age or from the Persian period, dating back to the First Temple or around the 5th or 6th century BCE. And it depicts a woman with a scarf covering her head and neck and features a prominent nose. And the woman is bare-breasted and her hands are folded under her chest. Oren Shmueli and Debbie Ben-Ami, curator of the Iron Age and Persian periods in the Israeli Antiquities Authority, explaining that these figurines were common in the home and in everyday life during those time periods, and apparently even served as amulets to ensure protection, good luck, and/or prosperity. The figurine, though, was delivered to the National Treasures Collection, and it's currently being studied in collaboration with the University of Helsinki in Finland. As for the young boy who found the amulet, he was awarded a certificate of appreciation for good citizenship by the Israel Antiquities Authority. And now here with more on this latest incredible archaeological discovery of a 2,500-year-old fertility figurine, it's time for Can You Dig It? With Israeli tour guide Anat Harel. All right, Anat, thank you so much. All right, a few months ago, there was another discovery, and there have been others also of fertility figurines, similar things. How common was this during the late Iron Age period?
Hi, nice to see you again, Aaron. Well, it turns out that during the late Iron Age period, which is also the Persian period, these figurines were everywhere. The last time we found them a few months ago, we spoke about hundreds of these figurines having been found all over Judea, okay? And now, apparently, what was an 11-year-old boy was walking around in one of the streams in the Negev, and he found one of them as well. So during that period, apparently, they were everywhere, and they've been found mostly in homes. So many families had them for some reason. So
that is actually my next question, and I'm sure that the short answer might be obvious, but who used these figurines primarily, and what were they primarily used for? Were they prayer artifacts, or were they, icons of some other sort, effigies? Help me out here.
Well, you know what? We don't really know for sure, but because they were so prevalent, then we believe that they were some kind of amulets or good omen figurines, maybe not necessarily for prayer, but just like today we have chamsas, or we cross our fingers, or we do things to try to, for good luck and stuff. These little figurines somehow were believed to bring good things to the family. And so many women had them probably for an easy birth, or for a healthy child, or to get pregnant, because we believe they were mostly fertility-oriented goddesses.
So, all right, then in today's Jewish nation, obviously we're taught that Judaism does not pray to idols. It's a pretty big rule that you're not supposed to do that. But right. This doesn't appear to have been the practice back in the day. Is it just a matter of point of view? Because like you said, we have icons like the chamsa and crossing our fingers and who knows what else.
Right. And so, the Judaism of today is not the Judaism of First Temple times, okay? So religions develop and they change. And what we do today is based on something that started about 2,000 years ago. It's, it went and formalized itself until what we have today. 2,500 years ago, during the First Temple times, our traditions did not look like what we have today. The Jewish people were just starting to conglomerate together and building a narrative and building some kind of religion and solidifying beliefs. And then what happened? The Babylonians came, destroyed the First Temple, destroyed Jerusalem, and exiled us, or at least the royal families, to Babylonia.
All right, Anat Harel, as always, it is my pleasure to have you here with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aaron.
All right, now let's take a look at the weather forecast with Chana Rifkin.
Lows tonight expecting to sit at an average of 51 degrees Fahrenheit or about 10 degrees Celsius. Then tomorrow's highs will hit an average of about 62 degrees Fahrenheit or about 17 degrees Celsius, calling for showers throughout the day. Now back to the studio.
All right, and now before we go, let's take a look at what's going viral in Israel.
You assuming I'm a human, what I gotta do to get it through to you? I'm superhuman, innovative, and I made a rubber, so that anything you say is shaking off of me and it'll glue to you. What is love? Baby, don't hurt me. Don't hurt me no more. I love you, baby. And if it's quite alright, I need it, baby. Let it be. Only you.
I never want to see a deep fake that isn't that again. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.28 shekels to the American dollar and 2.64 shekels to the Canadian dollar. For more news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And don't forget to visit the all-new and improved ILTV website at iltv.tv and subscribe to our newsletter for the latest updates while you're there. I'm Aaron Porras. Thank you so much for watching.